everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mia Burke, and I am program manager with Hanford Challenge. And Hanford Challenge is a nonprofit based in Seattle, Washington that focuses on cleanup of the Hanford nuclear site and also works closely with whistleblowers to ensure their voices are safely heard. This is the 6th webinar of our Nuclear Waste Scholar Series. We started the Nuclear Waste Scholar Series to inspire action and involvement with Hanford cleanup by inviting movers, shakers, and thinkers to share groundbreaking scholarship, art, research, and experience working with nuclear waste. Glenna's presentation is continuing on our artist series, in which we will be hearing from various artists and writers who use different mediums to explore nuclear waste. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Glenna Allee. Glenna is the author of Hanford Reach in the Atomic Field, a book that includes her photography and interviews with residents living near and affected by the Hanford nuclear site. Glenna currently has an art installation showing at the Wanapum Heritage Center near Mattawa, Washington. The installation includes work by 2 invited collaborators, Michael Paulus, who is a videographer, and John Leidecker, who is a sound designer. The installation also includes an animation created collaboratively with Gregory Cosmo Hahn and displays the poem Plume by Kathleen Flanagan. Glenna holds a Master of Fine Arts from San Francisco Art Institute and a bachelor's degree from Reed College. She has exhibited her work nationally and internationally. So just as a heads up, Glenna's presentation will be about 45 minutes long, and we will leave 15 to 30 minutes after the presentation for Q&A. If you can't stick around for the whole time, feel free to leave. We will be recording the presentation and we'll share a link to the recording with everyone that registered. So thank you so much for joining us today, Glenna, and I'll pass it to you now to talk about your work.
Thanks so much, Mia, and thanks, Liz. It's really, really a pleasure to be part of this series. I'm so glad to be part of a series that is including creative people along with scientists and all this other information. And I can't wait for the upcoming presentations. So I'm going to be scrolling through about 24 images, maybe more, depending on time, and then we can come back to some as people would like to. And I'm going to be introducing this long-term project. And I just want to say that it's a pleasure to chase Kathleen Flanagan's presentation. It's really, there's a 30-foot, I think it is, long print of her poem Plume in the installation. So it made me so happy to realize I was going to follow her. So here I'm going to share my screen. So there we go. Oh, I guess I hope that people can see that without us cutting into the images. So I wanted to start by situating us in the place where okay, the White Bluffs of Hanford Reach is a place that's been inhabited for 12 to 15,000 years. The estimations keep going back further in time as archaeologists realize they underestimated the age of human habitation here. And I like to just start by acknowledging that this is still land sacred to indigenous peoples of the area. Many interrelated tribes and tribes that have shared fishing and that kind of thing rights in this place. But in particular, the Wanapum, who are still very much in the area. They run the site that my own work is showing in. It's such an honor to have it there for 4 months. So this place, when I first visited Hanford and found this place, I was just really taken with the age of what I was looking at, you know, the geology of the Columbia River Gorge. And you're looking across here into the Hanford site. You can't really see at this scale. The photographs themselves are much larger in the installation, but there's a tiny reactor on the left side of the screen across the Columbia River there. You're looking from a sacred site into the Hanford restricted zone. And the paradoxes of this place were just really incredible as I learned more about what's happened here. Again, it's a sacred place for many thousands of years, where rituals are still held, indigenous rituals. And it's a place that was restricted for 4 decades, through the Cold War, pretty much 4 decades, to the public as a buffer zone, a nuclear buffer zone. It was really part of the site. And then it was in 2000 designated as a national monument and returned to public access as a wildlife refuge. And I was trying to take in these paradoxes, and they just are a lot to hold. And so, of course, I named the work after this place because it really symbolized the paradoxical nature of the histories that were related to me as I looked and revisited Hanford. Okay, and I'll just say that in recording in this place, I was trying to capture sound often and sometimes at night, and you can really observe the abundance of wildlife in a place that was left undisturbed for so long. It's remarkably different from what's around it. So I am going to chase that with an image of the salmon in the river below the White Bluffs, because I like to begin and end with them as well. They symbolize hope to me. They literally rejuvenate the entire ecosystem, and they hold a sacred place as well in all of the indigenous accounts and beliefs. They very literally, they feed the entire ecosystem. And I was privileged to gain access to boats that were actually not fishing. They were trying to help restore the salmon. They helped the salmon spawn. And I think this has been going on for about 10, 11 years, this effort. So to place ourselves in this place and in this anadromous, the term anadromy, of course, as many of you know, refers to the ability to live in multiple, the freshwater and the saltwater environments. So let's go to a larger riverscape. So this is a view looking over the Columbia River from part of the Hanford Reach site. And I first learned about Hanford when I had moved in 1984 out across the country to go to college in Portland, Oregon. And I fell in love with the landscape of the Columbia River Gorge. I thought it was just one of the most extraordinary places I'd ever seen, and spent a lot of time there. And then it was crossing the country, going home to New York City, that I learned, reading maps and talking with my traveling companions, that I was living downstream from a site that, as I think most of you know, had created the plutonium for the Nagasaki bomb, dropped August 9th, 1945. And also had created plutonium, started again through the Cold War, and for 4 decades created plutonium. And there are different statistics floating around, but we can say safely the lion's share of the plutonium in the US stockpile is sourced from this site. Some people say 2/3, some people say more than that. And there were 9 reactors constructed here, multiple processing plants, this whole system that was at work. And when I first learned about it, it was still operating. It was pre-Chernobyl. And it was just after Chernobyl, with a lot of public pressure, that a lot of this information and the information of what had been done over decades at Hanford was released to the public, more so. So, Yeah, so it was fascinating to me, not only that that I was living downstream, the enormity of this place. I was trying to take it in, and I studied the geology of it, the geology of the Columbia River Gorge in relation to it at one point, and learned about it from friends whose families had come from the area, and became more, not less interested over time. And So let's go to another slide that I'll just say this was the drone that, as I returned and photographed, was often hovering over my head. Um, the site can seem very wide open and unmonitored, but it's very monitored. And I'm convinced now that every motion around it is observed and recorded. And in the center image there, that's depicting the looking in to a crossing site that was part of the system for, shipping things around the site and down the river. There was a rail system that has been partly dismantled that we'll say more about, that moved plutonium all over the site. And on the right, I hope it's not blocked on everybody's screen. There's a reactor right behind my head on my screen, but it's a site of the Columbia, the currently operating plant that's for power. It's still operating, as I think many of you know. Okay, so currently, I guess I just want to, okay, we'll talk about this in a moment, but I wanted to say the site currently holds reactors in various stages of being taken apart, entombed, and also preserved. There's a reactor that's been reimagined as a museum, in which I attended an opera recently that was really extraordinary. It's a fascinating place, and it's also really a question: how safe is it? So I'll just let that question float there, along with, I think a lot of people zooming in might be involved in the discussions around what it means that this is a public park. Yeah, the site holds this museum, the reactor. It holds Native American sacred sites that are there's a lot of questions about preserving them and designating them as sacred sites, because they're secret sites. And in order to be protected, they have to be, designated. So it's really problematic. And there also are old townships that are still sort of like ghost towns that were evacuated in World War II to clear space for the Hanford site to be built. And I'll be talking more about those. So I was really fascinated. This is an image that is an example of how I was trying to think when I first visited as an artist with my camera. I was looking at the landscapes. This is the White Bluffs after a fire, and the fires rage very, very close to the site all the time. I mean, yearly now there are alarms, about the wildfires. And so I was, I guess, fortunate to find this, the white part of the White Bluffs just after a fire. But I was in visiting, I was thinking a lot, sort of as a faux ethnographer artist, just reading the landscape for clues and trying to sort of comprehend this landscape and what had been done here. And I was also recording stories, recording oral histories, and interviewing people to try to understand the culture around this place. So I began in this very intuitive process. It wasn't planned, making triptychs that mirrored the experience I was having in listening to very different perspectives about the histories here. So, and I was thinking a lot as an artist. For any of you that are artists, you might find this interesting about the history of photography and the sort of Western expansionism and the history of photography in the West of the US, and the panoramics that were made all over the place that really represented a Victorian attempt to sort of see it all and dominate it all. The word panorama was actually copyrighted by an Irish artist, Robert Barker, in 1791. It's taken from the Greek pan, which means everything or all, and orana, which is vision. So yeah, so I was looking at, the landscape and trying to create views of it. And these are quite large in the installation. If anyone can get up there and visit, they're 30 by 40 image photos. So 3 in a row is sizable, holds a wall well. And I was wanting to create these images that people could question, and they would be able to look, but also wonder, what am I seeing? Is this a continuous and broken up, or is it different places and different times? To instill, the idea subtly or even unconsciously that we shouldn't trust everything we're told. We could question everything we're told. And so here's an image that I took inside of the site. I actually took a tour. I don't think they allow photography anymore, or they didn't for a while. I drove them crazy, but they let me bring my camera in. So these images, these triptychs, were pieced together from different sites, the old townships that I was learning about, talking with people who had farmed here. Many of these people have passed away now, and I was really honored to speak with people who had been farmers that survived the Depression and lived in these townships inside of what's now the restricted zone. And then they were evacuated, some of them within 2 weeks. They were given barely any notice. This is after having survived the Depression, and some of them had standing harvests. And many of them could only find jobs thereafter in the area working on the Hanford site. So I was really interested in these, and those stories have been very well documented. There are archives that are great. Let's see. So I was interviewing these displaced people, people who had worked inside, engineers, also scientists who had designed Hanford, who had been cherry-picked from all over the country and brought there for the Manhattan Project. And as I was listening and recording, I was realizing that there are a lot of kind of negative spaces as how we think about things as artists a lot of the time. I was aware that there were voices I wasn't hearing from that must have existed and not been counted. All of the people who had worked in the fields, undocumented people. And I started digging around and sort of reaching to find some of those less documented accounts. And there's been some very good scholarship recently. There's a book by Robert Franklin that touches on, that explores those kinds of views that had been not the spotlit ones for a long time. So I was interviewing Native elders. I was interviewing African Americans who'd come up from the Deep South and often been given the most dangerous jobs. And I was interviewing farmers, farm workers, and a Cesar Chavez activist who was really active. He had a radio show that was targeted towards raising awareness amongst farm workers. Okay, let's see. So as I was listening to these accounts, I was struck by sort of the culture clash between very different accounts, and I was trying to hold them all respectfully. And there was also a sense of, often even in there's such a culture of pride still in the Tri-Cities, I'll say, that's been preserved. It's almost, I started to see it as in the DNA of the culture. And at the same time, even some of those voices, those people I interviewed who had still pride in having helped to create the bomb because they still see it as part of what ended the war, which has been, you know, it's this is, well, anyway, it's not what a lot of us believe these days. But even those voices, I heard a lot of subtext and narratives that were kind of, as I listened deeper, and as we talked sometimes a second or third time, I heard a lot of undercurrent fears, which to me mirrored the landscapes themselves, and the question that about what was under the ground. So here's a blow up, a rephotographed image that I expanded of a Polaroid I found in an archive. It's from the Hanford History Project in Richland. It's a plutonium particle at 600 times, 6,200 times, sorry. So it's a vintage Polaroid of a plutonium particle. Amazing discovery in a back of a drawer. Okay, and I'll move forward from there to say that to me, the landscapes became filled with the voices that I was listening to. That sounds funny, but it was, you know, I couldn't stop thinking about the people I was interviewing as I looked at these landscapes. This is a triptych, very discontinuous triptych put together of a vineyard that's directly across from the nuclear zone. You can see the Columbia generating plant in the background there. And, you know, in all these places, people are just out there working in the fields. So let's see. I think that this is probably a good point to play you a clip of the sound piece. And let me just say that what I was trying to do was create, I was realizing that the piece was going to be not just a photo series, but an installation. And I had all of these interviews. I think they're now 23, or there's 24. There's a couple that are pending. And I was stacking them in a sound program and fragmenting them into essential fragments of things that people said, like distillates, you know, really strong to me things that could reverberate off one another. And so I was making a collage, and then had the help of a real sound genius pulling them together into a piece that we put on 5 speakers that you can enter a room and hear this collage surrounding you. And the voices are grouped on these 5 speakers into groups of, for example, scientists and engineers, farmers and native elders, and activists also, downwinders. Yeah, so I'm going to play you a clip of that. And there's also ambient sound that we mixed in, and then John Leidecker also added in some of his own subtle sound. The ambient sound to me really gets at the drift across this space, all the life that's constantly moving through this space, which is not sealed at all. And I'll come back to that thought. Okay. So.
Millirankins. That is a measurement of nuclear radiation.
And when our father did come home after being scrubbed, raw in a white, he had on white coveralls a couple of times. We just knew that he got too close to radiation, but we certainly did not know what my father was doing. And all of us were there at some one time when we became young adults.
What we had to do, we had to take that instrument, that meter out of that instrument and black out that word.
We walk along 40 or 50 feet apart and survey. And if we find something, we had a minor construction individual with a bucket behind us. Pick this up, and put it in the bucket. You didn't find much of anything, but it was in the mid 50s, maybe late
For the
50s.
simple reason that when that instrument is installed out in the field somewhere, a lot of different people could be looking at the
And we
instrument.
left Tri-Cities, I believe, in 81. And my parents talk about how they couldn't sell their house because Tri-Cities had become a ghost town.
So it's a matter of secrecy. They didn't want people to know what we were measuring. Well, that would
In a way, people like this, you might say we're guinea pigs because we were the ones working out there with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna just say what I forgot to say before showing you that the video is pieced together by Michael Paulus from his footage. We were traveling all around the site to different points of view, and he was, so there are all these different views in that he's layering there and beautifully. And then there are these maps. I have found all of these maps and had the idea of projecting them onto the floor, which is part of what is in the installation. There's a sequence that moves, cycles through these different maps, and you can listen to the sound at the same time. So this isn't, what I just showed you is like a clip that was in the whole process of pulling together what we would show. Mike created this clip that gives an idea of what you experience in part of the installation, where you can encounter those, like the maps. And one of the maps there is an old railroad map of the Plutonium Railroad, which shuttled plutonium all over the site, and which different people mentioned at different times in different ways. But there are accounts I was told of like trains from that railroad being found to be so radioactive that they just buried them, they landfilled them out on the site, or they would just leave them standing flagged out on the site as radioactive objects. And it was really fascinating that to me that the junctions on this map were named after women, both as it sort of, it seemed tributary and also sort of terrible. These plutonium railroad junctions named Pearl and Audrey, but and I think Mike was fascinated by that too, and it brought in the human, so it brought in, really, I think it was one of the things that to me brought home like what I was seeing, the relationships of a landscape and body. And so this is an image of the installation. The current, let's see, this is actually, I still have to get up there to document the Wanapum Center. This is from the prior installation in Stockton, but it's showing the different views of the White Bluffs in Hanford Reach, including a tapestry that I began to assemble of different times and years and points of view of this sacred place, with the idea that also it might become an interactive site in the Wanapum Center. We'll see what can happen during this period of time that it's up. But there's sort of an invitation for the community to enter into this sculpture and add to it, or add things to it. And also maybe we'll use it as a place where we can record more narratives and memories in relationship to this place and to the Hanford site. And you can see that behind the bluffs, somewhat concealed, is an image that I'm going to talk about next. It's an image of a downwinder who requested that I document the scars left by thyroid cancer surgeries. Thyroid cancer is very prevalent in this place. So I put it together with these landscapes because I was seeing more and more that there were these ways that human bodies and the landscape sort of were mirroring one another to me. And it's also somewhat concealed because these stories have been buried a lot. They've been denied. It's been very difficult for people to receive compensation and recognition of having been harmed. So here's a expanded view of, the first one of the first scar that I photographed. I had first actually learned about these scars, these terrible scars, being called the Hanford necklace, and the most horrible name is the Hanford smile, which I heard several times. I actually had heard about these years before when I was showing some images in an artist critique, and the great artist Sharon Grace, who recently passed away. She was an extraordinary just technical, like real innovator, sound artist, video artist. She showed me her scar when I showed images of Hanford and told me about the Hanford necklace. She was a survivor of the 1949, I think it is, Green Run, where they released radiation in this area, and there were just it was just this huge, epidemic of thyroid cancer. And so I was creating a piece that I have in the installation, a linked necklace of prints, sort of to scale, life-size scale prints of people's Hanford necklaces, scars. I see this piece as it's really it's tragic. However, it's also triumphal. These are people who survived, and it's a way for them to have a voice that links. Hopefully it will be linking around the world. It's linking various sites. So there's part of it up in the installation, strung together. Okay. So all of this had me thinking a lot about, the incompatibility, the pride I was hearing, and the culture in the Tri-Cities that there's still atomic symbols all over the place. There's an atomic pizzeria, brewery, and there's sort of a culture, though I think that there's, in a way, an openness to discussion I see happening. There's also this culture of secrecy and silence that was perpetuated for so long, and of pride. And then there are these accounts of people being harmed. And I was wanting to respect every individual person that I spoke with. There's a lot of really good activist start that's been done, about Hanford in particular. I wanted, what interested me was to create something where these different accounts could be together and sort of collide and also coexist. I was told, I'm showing this image of the plutonium pacemaker because I was told by one really brilliant and proud engineer scientist about the plutonium pacemaker, which there were actually several of these created and embedded in people. And they were ensured to outlive you. They would keep your heart beating in perpetuity. The only caveat being that if you had one put in, you would have to be interred as nuclear waste in an official site. And I was trying to understand this effort to create these, these immortal objects. And I was thinking, and also, there was at one point I was photographing in an archive in the Hanford History Archives in Richland, and I backed into this. This was a full body scanner that people would be checked with leaving work. And I had heard about these. I'd also been told stories about children being run through these. So, you know, I found myself inside of this and photographed it. And so, I then was told the story of the atomic marble, which I see as one of the really seminal symbols of this work. It holds the world turned on its head. And I'm actually going to play a clip, but I interviewed someone who had become an activist, had been raised as a farmer, really patriotic and pro-nuclear. And as a child, he told the story of, as a child, being given these marbles out in their schools from a bubblegum machine to prove that radioactive waste could be safely encased in glass. They were handing these out to school children. So I'm going to play you that clip now.
Later, when we went on the tour of the federal building, they took us through it and they said, now radiation is wonderful. It's safe, and Hanford's safe, and we test everything, and you're safe. And when we left, they had like a bubblegum machine, and inside they had these round balls. They were glass balls, and they said you can each have one. And we got to turn them, and the thing went click, 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 and dropped out into our hand. They said inside that glass is radioactive waste. It's safely encased in glass, and that's what we're going to do with the waste from Hanford. Well, as kids, we don't know there's any waste at Hanford.
So that's the voice of Tom Bailey describing that experience. And that little video was made by Diane Chung in San Francisco. She runs a really great gallery that showed this work recently. Yeah, and so the marble, yeah, I mean, you know, I was more and more coming to see at the center of this work that there was a theme of this collision of worldviews, a worldview that basically ascribes to the idea that everything can be sealed. And whether it's our salad, our lunch salad, you know, in many layers of plastic, or our borders, or radioactive waste in glass, that it's possible to hold something as with the longevity of nuclear waste. And then, you know, there were these much older worldviews that have rituals that I was just learning a bit about, that, you know, we have to be reminded by ritual and practice that everything's interconnected, that nothing's sealable, that that's mythology. And so the marble really felt like a key symbol thereafter. And also, so did the tumbleweed. So I learned that the tumbleweeds, salsolas, had actually arrived in the Americas on Spanish galleons. They stowed away. They came originally from the steppes of Asia, and they rolled all the way across onto the Spanish galleons, and they came, you know, to the shores of the US and, well, America, and found their way west and onto Hollywood silver screens, and became this cliche of all our Western films. But, you know, they're an immigrant, and they're a stowaway immigrant. And not only that, but they have extremely long roots that leach anything under the ground. So, I mean, 20-foot roots, 25-foot roots. And this to me was also a really interesting paradox. So the tumbleweeds, I've always loved them, but they became this symbol for the work as well. Because at Hanford, there's still a percentage of the tumbleweeds that are radioactive. I think people tell me different numbers. So, and I'll get skewered for listing any of them, but, you know, I keep still hearing 1 to 2% currently. So prove me wrong. And it's supposed to be a practice that's no longer practiced, but the solution to finding these radioactive tumbleweeds was to tag them and to burn them. And I ended up doing a series of the fires around Hanford, but I was really fortunate to be able to witness this. We were driving back with my collaborator, Michael Paulus, and saw this by the side of the road. They were burning tumbleweeds. And so, of course, right here, it's this question of what's contained and what's dispersed. Let's just set it on fire and disperse it all over everything and let it go back into the groundwater and come up in the wine and, everything that grows. Who knows? It's supposedly, everything's monitored, but I heard accounts again and again of how of monitors not working, of them being like these ways that they're supposed to be checking, but the equipment is inactive or the records are not there when you look for them. So yeah, and the most painful part of the work was learning about from two different downwinders. I was told about the baby graves in the cemeteries in the Tri-Cities area and in Walla Walla as well. What I did was select from these vast areas of the cemeteries where you find baby graves, which you can find anywhere in the world, but in the Tri-Cities it's remarkable how many there are. And there are many from this era of, the early era where they were experimenting, the Green Run era, and around that time. So yeah. And I'm gonna just leave it with the hopeful image of salmon returning. Just bringing it back to this is, I think, a nicer place to land. It was, and I guess one thing I can say around this was that I was working on boats with people. We were having discussions, and I was realizing that our political viewpoints and perspectives on a lot, the media we were listening to, we were coming from really different directions. But it was really kind of wonderful to be witnessing people helping to restore the salmon. And with some of them, we had these really interesting conversations respectfully around the differences in our points of view. And that's really where I'm hoping the work can live and continue to live. So it's wonderful to present it here. I hope to present it in Tri-Cities. I hope that all the people who helped install the work up at the Wanapum Center will keep talking. It's, I guess, in the book, I'll just end in the book. I have a line in there somewhere about denial and about feeling like I was encountering cultural denial. And in thinking about that, as it resonated, I realized like that's a heavy statement to levy at a culture. All of us, I think, are in denial one way or another at one time or another. And it's way more complicated when you start talking with individual people to try to fathom, the differences and the polarization of viewpoints. It's so much more complicated than understanding that hegemony, like the domination of governments and corporations. And so anyway, hopefully that's like where this work will continue to live, to provoke a kind of productive and creative dialogue with respect. Okay. I'll end there. And if I could just put up one more slide. There's always one more salmon. I have a list of links here too. And I'll just say, that's my website. You can order the book there. You can see more of the work. There's an archive. You have to scroll down and click images. It's going to get better, that website. But there's an archive there for anyone who wants to listen to full interviews. Mike's website's there to see his amazing work, and John's incredible website. And also, we did an hour-long episode on John's radio show, the Over the Edge show. It's archived at KPFA. I think they keep it for a year or more, and you can hear the whole sound piece there. And also, there's a mention of Kathleen's book, Plume, just such an incredible work. And the poem is by the door of the installation, to connect dots. I wanted people to draw their own conclusions as they walk through the work, but then to also see that breathtaking poem. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Glenna. I so appreciate you sharing your art and your artistic process and your perspective. It's just wonderful.